Welcome back into the shed, everyone. I'm your host, Jonathan Moz, and my guest today is Tom Sollitt. Tom is running for Portland City Council District number 3. He is a community organizer and the founder of Asian American Town, which is a nonprofit that elevates and uplifts and supports and advocates for Asian American-owned businesses. You might know them for their legendary Makers Market, which is their flagship event. But anyways, Tom, thanks for coming to the shed. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the podcast. And just one clarification that Asian American Town is intentionally a for-profit entity. There were a lot of recommendations to become a nonprofit, but with that comes certain restrictions. And I think just the same way I'm going to tackle this campaign, an entrepreneurial mindset is kind of needed.
It's kind of ironic that I made that mistake because I'm in the same boat. A lot of people assume BikePortland's a nonprofit, but I would give the same answer as you just did if people asked me why I've stayed a for-profit company. Anyway, okay, thanks for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Let's see. So you are, like we were just talking about, you are a newcomer to the Portland political scene. So what beyond, my short cursory intro, do you want people to know about Tom Sollitt?
I think, some of my personal motivations for being interested in politics is somebody who's been personally impacted by decisions made by a small handful of lawmakers who probably thought they're doing their best for the community, but they didn't provide the underlying systemic foundation or the cultural kind of base that was needed to keep people like myself in country, which resulted in me being adopted and raised here in Oregon.
Oh, so you're born in Korea, adopted, and you grew up in Corvallis, right?
That's correct.
So Oregon. And then you went back to Korea to teach English?
For a couple of years while I was learning how to speak Korean. And then by year 3 or 4, I went full-time on immersion programs for Korean language and then eventually did branding and marketing over there.
And then when you came back to Oregon, you were saying with that last question, that reintegration, so to speak, was like how the experience that you had, I would imagine good and bad, helped inform kind of like your political perspectives and maybe some inspiration for why you're running.
Absolutely. I think being able to leave for a while, experience another city and the way that they operate really provides much needed perspective for what's possible in a place like this. And I think it's helped me think a little bit bigger, maybe slightly more creatively when it comes to pursuing kind of community-based work. And I'd like to take that into local office.
Okay, so to be clear and kind of specify a little bit, a lot of your platform or, trying to understand why you want to run. I mean, Portland's sort of like notoriously a hard place to govern. So I'm always curious, like, why do you want to throw your hat in the ring? Sounds like, and again, obviously I've read through your website. You really are big on wanting to make sure that everybody in Portland, all Portlanders, have the ability to participate in decisions that affect them. So I imagine you're going to be talking a lot about public and community outreach and how power is distributed, or do you want to add anything more to that?
Absolutely. And I think this is part of my entire ambition between the moment I got back to Portland. And because I lived abroad for so long, I didn't have a really easy cushion to land back in. 7 years away, my personal network had almost completely disappeared other than my family. So I started from scratch. So I know how hard it is to kind of build up a network from ground zero. And I think it doesn't need to be that hard, especially if we have all these kind of social systems, mutual aid systems through community-based groups, just providing more support for them so they can provide more support for everyone else.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive because feels like in a way your whole project, your whole business is the strength of your network to some degree. That's a key part of like what you're doing in the community is connecting people, getting to know people, right? Plugging different folks into other orgs and other people and creating power through, small business and makers, right?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because my personal kind of immigration story is one where I am an immigrant, but because I was adopted, I was kind of excluded from the immigrant community growing up. But repatriating to Korea for a while as an expat, I kind of had that experience of, second language learning, finding community base, finding my own 2 feet as an adult in a way that kind of helped me get a more holistic experience of what it's like, not just from like a second gen experience, but from more first gen take on what it means to kind of have a community behind you to help prop you up, or what it means when you don't have one, and you have to create that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a little bit about transportation and how, moving around has been a part of your life, both recent, past, and currently. Did you grow up driving everywhere? Do you take the bus? What did you do in Korea? How did you get around in Korea?
So I'll start with growing up, because I was a townie. So I lived a block from the university campus. I was able to walk to school, able to ride my bike to school. And then I went to Oregon State University, which is a very self-contained campus, and everywhere I lived was close enough to walk. And then after that, I moved to South Korea, which has a impressive transportation system. I've seen critiques online that even people go from Korea to Japan, and they make comparisons to how well structured and integrated the public transportation system is over there. So I spent 7 years not even thinking about driving a car.
Wow. Okay.
And then came back here, and every place I needed to go was so far apart. I became very resentful for that very first year, because I did feel like I had to drive. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to seize the opportunities that I needed to, being someone new in Portland.
Right. I hear what you're saying. And when you have to make the decision between, am I going to drive to this place or not being able to make those connections, which are sort of a big part of your life and business? Yeah. Like obviously you're going to drive there. Yeah.
And the uncertainty of whether or not this public transportation is as reliable
For
as
sure.
the one that I just experienced.
Yeah. And just so folks know, you're telling me beforehand, you live around Laurelhurst Park, right? So there, where are you kind of moving around? What are your kind of corridors that you're frequenting on? And
So I used to walk down Burnside a lot, or down Ankeny. So I'll try to take a side street more often than not. So my go-tos are Honey Latte Cafe and Rose City Coffee Company, and I'm able to walk to both.
Okay.
Or downtown. So I'm very centralized in the fact that I have the luxury of being a pedestrian first person when it comes to getting around town. And then on the rare occasion, I've got multiple trips that are going to take me from maybe here, North Portland, to try to get to the transportation open house in District 1 all in the same day. Sometimes I do have to drive.
Yeah. Okay. So your mix, you walk a lot in your neighborhood. You drive when you need to get to places further afield. Do you bike at all? I thought I heard you say you biked recently. Or do you have a bike, access to a bike, or do you ride around much?
I have the same bike that I grew up on. So
Really?
I didn't grow that much since high school.
Okay.
So
Yeah. And I can relate to what you're saying about Corvallis. So I've got two of my girls. One graduated, one's still there, but we go down there every so often. So I wish it was a lot more bike friendly, but yes, it's definitely bikeable and walkable. So you have that same bike, and you've ridden around Portland?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunities to participate with someone who I connected with early on named Rue. He started this digital magazine called War Paint.
Oh yeah,
For
Rue, of
people-
course.
Yeah, I think
Rue
he-
Andy Albiesworth, yes. Yeah.
He actually had a meet and greet on Ankeny really early on, I think, with their group, BikePortland.
Yeah, I invited him out to Bike Happy Hour, which is like right on
Bike
Ankeny,
Happy
so
Hour,
close
yeah.
to your house. We meet there in the summertime. Or we used to. Right now we're on North Williams with
And this
our
must have been like
meetings.
a couple years ago.
Yeah.
That was right when he started.
Yeah.
So we were hanging out, and I kept saying, you really just need to get started with this thing.
That's so cool.
So I was kind of along with him on that initial journey as he was getting more connected with like Northwest Trail Alliance and
Oh, great.
Grow,
Yeah.
that
Okay.
platform. So that was kind of, my introduction to very specific terminology, like, berms and,
Yeah.
outside of other things where I've done kind of pedal palooza rides or kind of solidarity rides during like 2020, we're learning more about kind of biking in groups and kind of how people structure their routes, corking, and all the different things that are necessary to make sure it's a safe experience for everyone.
So you've done some of those bike summer rides and rides around town?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Oh, I wanted to ask too.
Actually, I organized one for Asian American Town.
Oh, neat.
August
Which
of
one?
2023. It was an Asian solidarity ride. So
Okay.
I connected with somebody who did that in 2022. So typically that's kind of how I structured my events, was try to find somebody who was very passionate or
Yeah.
an expert in a certain area, so we could kind of amplify each other's efforts.
Yeah, I remember there were some Asian solidarity rides, especially once COVID started going and there was all this Asian hate, terrible stuff going on. And that definitely bubbled up. Almost anything that's happening more broadly in society, in America, whatever, politics, is going to find its way to bike rides in Portland. That's just how it goes. And I want to ask you specifically too about transit and bus? Have you figured the transit system out here? Do you use it?
I'll use it when I've got one trip,
Okay.
if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not so concerned about having another thing scheduled in the day that I absolutely have to get to afterwards. It's mostly the few times that I initially tried to ride the bus. Every once in a while, it'll just be late,
Yeah, I hear you.
10 or 15. So you can't really do a tight type of scheduling. So you have to make sure that you're prepared to be a little early to whatever situation you have set up, and that you might not be able to catch public transportation conveniently afterwards.
Very cool. Okay, I want to get into some specific stuff around transportation and
Yeah.
a little bit of politics, but just so people know you a little bit better,
Yeah.
can you just explain specifically some of the stuff Asian American Town does?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So Asian American Town was a personal response to what I felt was missing in our community, which was a true third space for Asian Americans to just gather, similar to the concept of a student union on a university campus, where you can pull up. You don't have to have commerce as a barrier, religion, or alignment with a nonprofit initiative. And the goal was to see if we could find a way for capitalism to support that third space without the necessity of people who come through always having to fund that space.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and I noticed you put on like a maker's fair. So
in a way, that was like a case study.
I
And
see.
to be honest, I don't necessarily think it's needed anymore. It's happened 3 times at this point, and I think if people haven't figured it out at this point, the really amazing thing that you can do when you've got vendors who are doing transactional things, and we can subvert capitalism to support things like artistic performance, thought leadership, film screenings, arts and crafts. And this is possible if we have the right kind of imagination around what we can do.
Neat.
And that's part of doing really big structured coordinated affair, and that's something I couldn't do alone, and took many other co-organizers and people with their own specific focuses to agree to all meet together at this day on this time. And it was a good experience, but I'm looking forward to kind of taking that and applying it broadly. So I still think the Asian American community is just a small kind of sample, and it is reflected across almost every single kind of specific group that you look at.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at your website, I was just thinking there's a lot of parallels to like people that love biking in Portland and the community aspects, where you talk about some of the creativity and reasons why people can or can't take part in it. I think it's
Right.
part of the story of Portland's biking decline is people's ability to take part in this third space around people who love bikes has been curtailed by their need to live further out because they couldn't afford the rent, or they had to make more money, or work longer hours. They left them less time to create all like the cool bike related culture that you see in the shed here.
Yeah.
So I'm just noticing some similarities there.
Yeah, it's in a way kind of inspired by mutual aid to provide enough space for people to have the freedom to build the environments that we all really deserve to live in. And Asian American Town is also kind of the legendary makers market, and the rest of that is a culmination of all the projects that I've done since moving here. So since I couldn't find a job right away, I needed to get busy. So I started producing cannabis infused dinner events with somebody I met randomly. And I was helping him build a pitch deck, because we both went to school for design and communications. He went more in production. I went more in like marketing strategy. And eventually he was just like, you know what, why don't we just spin off and do a dinner? And that kind of really motivated me to get out there, meet people. And I was like, oh my gosh, all you have to do is have a premise like an event, and I can just go talk to anyone who's remotely remotely related, no matter how loose the connection is. And I can just slide into their DMs on social media, send them an email. And what was amazing is more people were open to meeting and participating than really just were like, no, absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of Portland, is that we're still so much in need of anchor points for different types of communities, that people are willing to be open-minded about opportunities that present themselves.
And you talk a lot about local resilience on your website, on your platforms. And I know you're running for elected office, so I know you're not going to put on your website, "Look, we need to raise taxes to support the city that we want."
Actually, we
It-
should.
okay, good. I was going to ask you. So the balance there. You talk about mutual aid. You talk about local resilience. You talk about
Right.
freeing people up so that they can have the financial security to support the things they love. I've heard you mention in interviews how public broadcasting had their federal funding cut, but then now I think OPB is actually doing better than they were before because it inspired so many people to support Oregon Public Broadcasting after the cuts. But I saw I saw a little bit about that on your website, and I was thinking, how much will you lean into saying, well, obviously, okay, we have to pay for city services and we have to have a revenue stream.
Mhm.
You're running for an office. How much do you say, let's lean on, let's all get together and have the bake sale kind of thing versus like, look, we're going to have to raise taxes and people are going to have to pay some amount to keep this whole ship, in the air.
Well, ultimately, I think that if it's communicated correctly, okay, correctly is like a very
Yes, of course.
definitive word,
Yes.
but I think there's a way to communicate the need and understanding that if we are raising taxes kind of through the gas, the fix our street proposal, is that it absolutely is just this money will not be used for anything else. It will only be used to fill these potholes. Maybe it has a time limit duration as a stopgap measure as we think about more long-term sustainable funding. Because if you look at PBOT's website right now, and maybe it's because they feel the need to describe to the public how their budget and their revenue models work, is that if they are successful in these goals of climate justice and to replace this old infrastructure of a car-centric society with a more green pedestrian public transportation, bike, maybe in water or train, tram, we've got a lot of
The
different
Frog
options.
Ferry is still
Yeah. I actually
kicking.
met with a couple folks from there earlier today.
Okay.
Very timely.
Yeah.
But if we want to have that reality, we need to understand how we're going to pay for that. And, I've watched some of the town halls, and Sophie Peel has been very direct in saying, the gas tax is no longer really meeting the needs.
Mhm.
So what ideas do you have?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, tonight is the first of the Portland Bureau of Transportation's holding 4 open houses, one in each district. Tonight being the first one up in District 4. And they're going to just be, I think at this point, just trying to take the temperature of Portlanders and floating out a few of their top ideas. I'm curious, are you aware of like their 4 recommended funding sources? Do you have any comment about their general situation and their approach thus far?
I don't think they've explored all the options that are available. And I think the way that they go about implementation for some of them needs to be very strategic. So when I look at some of the things around kind of utility, some of the challenges we have is we are preventing some of our businesses from opening because they have to do kind of infrastructure changes to either sewer, things that are going to tear up the road, but they're being stuck with the bill ahead of time.
You're talking about the transportation utility fee, which could be, I feel like their number one thing that they end up putting out there. Councilor Clark talks about it all the time, and there's 32 other cities that are doing it. I feel like that could be the one that emerges, but you're saying that,
I think it's the most appropriate, but it's the way that we implement how people pay for it.
especially on the business side, which I know
Yes.
you're going to be very sensitive to.
So this is one of the things that one of the first very specific examples I looked at is the Doug Fir Lounge, which I mentioned on the other podcast, because it has like 6 different bureaus tied into their journey to opening, that we as a community all lose if they can't open, because they're being stuck with these fees and bills to pay before they can open their doors and generate revenue. So if there's an easement, or if there's a new type of policy or ordinance that could be changed to allow them to pay within a year, or to make these structural changes, in a year or two. And they're not the only ones. Like, I'm on the advisory board for a clinic in town called Haydock, and they're currently going through this process where they need to do fundraising because they need to make sure that their new space is ADA accessible, but it's preventing them from getting started. So you're preventing a business from generating revenue by sticking them with such an impossible upfront fee to cover, even if they've been in business for a while and can demonstrate that they are good for the money if you let them open for a year or two.
So more creative financing possibly
Right.
on something like that.
So it's not that I don't think that these things are appropriate. It's just how do we implement them in a
Mhm.
way that is sound and smart, that keeps people in motion as opposed to keeping people kind of in purgatory, or kind of stalls them from taking any action at all, which isn't helpful for us.
Any other of the the PBOT calls them alternative funding, alternative revenue sources or something? Any other of those top four? So they recommended not just the utility fee, but something they call the street damage restoration fee. They've got a retail delivery fee, like
Retail
the
delivery
e-commerce
fee.
Amazon one, and then the third party food delivery fee, like more specific. Any of those kind of like strike you in a certain way?
I think it'll be interesting what the public has to say about both of those. I know that retail delivery is a mixed bag when it
Mm.
comes to certain restaurants in the first place. Especially, I think there's a big controversy around like Postmates just signed all the restaurants up and whether they wanted to be on there or not.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Initially, don't quote me on that one.
Okay, no, I
Or in
heard.
fact, I need fact checking.
Yeah,
Is
sure,
what I'm
sure.
about to say. But it's realistic that these are things that weren't accounted for in previous plans because the height of retail delivery, of food delivery, third parties, just skyrocketed in the last 6 years, 7 years, and that's something that is really hard for people to predict, 10 years in advance, for what our infrastructure needs or kind of taxation or whatever permits or fees might be applicable for that. And we need to adjust with the times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me how businesses are going to figure in to this revenue conversation. They always figure in. Do you think it's fair? I mean, I think given your background, do you think people will see you as like a business candidate? That can be a label that, you know, candidates get put on. I
I
mean,
kind of personally hope so.
okay, yeah.
I
Um,
think even our most hardened kind of ideologically socialist leaning counselors are recognizing without commerce, without economy, we have no revenue for services that are needed.
yeah, and
And they're starting to pay attention to that.
yeah, and I ask you because there are people in the space that I operate in a lot. I call, transportation reform advocacy,
Hmm.
people who want streets to look differently than they do now, whether that means more space for buses, more space for bikes, fewer cars on the streets.
Hmm.
There is a checkered past, let's say the least, around folks who would be seen as a business candidate or a business-minded politician, or just businesses in general.
Hmm.
There's been, since I've been doing this, many situations where, let's say, the Portland Metro Chamber has said, we don't like this project because it will constrain auto use. There's things going on 82nd Avenue where a lot of businesses were saying they were opposed to a bus lane on there. So I'm just curious, given that you're going to have that label on you as a business candidate, how do you feel about the tension between being pro-business and changing the way our streets work so that non-drivers have a easier time of it? And what can you assuage some folks' concerns that you're going to be part of that sort of lobby, or that perspective that always sees it as a zero sum between parking or business access as being mutually exclusive to bike lanes or bus lanes?
Let me redefine being the business candidate. I think it's just easier to be kind of labeled that way because it's short.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
my focus is on economic revitalization and independence, which kind of isolates us and buffers us from kind of federal grant cuts. And even Olivia Clark during the town hall 2 days ago, or Councillor Clark, was mentioning, after watching everything go through with the state legislator, that we can't really rely on state funding or federal funding at this moment. So if we need to have things buoyed, we need to have everyone on board to make sure that we get that funding. And that includes our greatest revenue sources, which do include businesses. So making sure that this is an open conversation and people are included, I think we just make sure that we expand that conversation to include more people, because I was watching, part of what activated me too is volunteering on 82nd Avenue right around the same time they implemented the division project for their BAT,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing the unfortunate impact it had on legacy businesses. because of the way that the streets changed, the infrastructure changed, and kind of the placement of bus stops, where even though people were surveyed and they went to community groups, it didn't really appear that any of that was taken into account when they executed.
So you're saying that you obviously you'd like to see better collaboration
Yes.
between business and decision making around street projects.
Well, broadly speaking, because I think
Okay.
what I've been a little quiet, so I do have my social media account up, but you may see that I don't post that much, but I've been pretty active going to different associations, business associations, conducting different interviews, trying to reach people that work in parks, work in water, work in houseless kind of communities to make sure that I get a more holistic view over what's happening. And some of the things that really does come up quite often or there is something labeled a good neighbor agreement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's one of these kind of check boxes. And as somebody who got invited to be part of some of these kind of listening sessions around 82nd Avenue when I didn't even live in the neighborhood, and also I went to the open houses for TriMet when they discuss their new proposals for buses, and to watch the disappointment in the people that took the time to come out there to realize they didn't have a chance to give feedback on this. We were just being shown what they're about to implement. That this is where the public trust breaks down, is that we have decisions that have been made. Communication isn't clear.
Mm.
People still think they have a chance to weigh in on it. But the reality is that decision has been decided upon. And this seems to be more of a legal checkbox that they have to do to engage with the public.
Yeah. I would say, though, that when you say the decision has been made, what I think about is the decision's been made in the plans that we've adopted as a city, the goals, right, that we, meaning, I don't know how you would splice that, but, you know, the city runs and implements things based on adopted plans, right? All of our plans say certain things about how our street should look, right?
Absolutely.
They say either more buses and or more bikes or better sidewalks or more lighting, more safety, more crossings, more traffic calming. All that stuff has been decided in these plans. So then we have agencies get an opportunity to implement that, and they fulfill the goals that a lot of people that helped pass those plans spoke up about. And what I think I hear a lot from some business folks is we want input, but I think what's underlying that sometimes is we don't want the street to change like that. And we're going to talk about lack of process and lack of feedback because that's a more acceptable way to talk about this. It doesn't get us in hot water for saying.
I'm going to push back.
Yeah, go ahead. I want you to.
Someone who was actively involved with kind of the way outreach was conducted for 82nd Avenue and that transition in 2021 to 2022 is I felt so compelled because I was like, this seems like room for our growth to make sure more people are included in providing input. Is within a month, I worked with some local establishments to conduct a survey, which actually had an impressive reach to almost every neighborhood up and down 82nd Avenue as far as participants, and over 400 people decided to weigh in. So to me...
You conducted that yourself?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So I guess one of these things about me, unfortunate for my personality, is I'll complain about something and then I'll have a moment where I'm like, okay, this is a waste of time. If I think it can be better, then I'll just go ahead and try to do something. And then I'll complain because then I've got more grounds to critique, or now I know definitively more people wanted to weigh in on what was happening and more people wanted to participate. And it's one of these things where when people don't have an opportunity to be heard, I think that's where you start getting these really loud voices later in the process.
So how should we remedy stuff like that? Do you think, let's say there is people speak up maybe later because they were left out of the process? Because as you say, maybe, you're saying that systemically, the way the city might conduct outreach on some of these transportation projects leaves some voices out. So they speak up later, which
Right. Because they find out later.
Right. They find out later, say that, it's often, we didn't have a chance to have our voice known, and turns out we want something different than we're seeing on these poster boards and in the vision and the concept and the designs. So what do you think is a good way to remedy that? Do you pause the project and sort of redo the feedback, which then could lead to a different design, or like, right? What is the solution? What's the remedy to that tension? Because it happens all over the city pretty often.
I feel like it happens quite a bit. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we're looking at, the bottle drop or the bottle depot is going to move on to Powell and I think 11. And speaking with some of the folks that I met in the Brooklyn neighborhood, is they feel like they've been okay, they feel like they haven't been properly included in that conversation, and it's going to create tension uh, just from the sheer number of people. And as somebody who's about to become a counselor or fingers crossed, if I am elected, this will be actually a major point of contention, and I can see that coming in the future. But because the good neighbor agreement, and this is part about hearing about the good neighbor agreement there, Roseway neighborhood, they have the golf course, and they did a good neighbor agreement, or there was a plan approved around a parking lot. But then later afterwards, when the neighborhood had kind of weighed in and were like, yep, this sounds great to us, they made an addition to add a walkway around the golf course, which lets people walk and look into people's backyards. And because that notification came later, some of the neighbors expressed that, they felt uncomfortable, but if they had had the opportunity to know that this addition was going to be made, they would have weighed in, or they could have had an opportunity to organize to voice their concerns. But, so for me, this isn't just an isolated thing to like the 82nd project, or it's happening almost in every neighborhood. I can probably find an example of this.
Yeah.
So I think taking what we know now, we can't go back in the past. We can't pause these projects necessarily, but we can recognize that this continues to be a point of improvement and try to come up with a new way to engage with the public.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see some solution to that, because it comes up a lot, and I don't know what the remedy is other than it's difficult. You can't do good neighbor agreements on just every capital project necessarily. And the question I have is like, at what point is the public outreach sufficient, right? I think I could see people saying the city's spending too much because this public outreach is super robust. So at some point there has to be a line drawn where it's like, okay, folks over here aren't going to be told about this. Or, the other thing is the government has only so much capacity to reach people. So I think you can always talk about someone not knowing about a project. And I'm really curious on how that gets resolved, because again, the city implements projects that have been passed in plans. And I think it makes it hard for things to change when this comes up so much, and the city's not doing a good job getting past it, figuring out how to deal with it. I think there's sometimes good faith and bad faith folks,
right?
So it's tricky.
You can never know the full extent of
right.
what's going on, but you can take a look at what hasn't gone well, reflect upon that, and try to see if there's a different pathway forward that includes more people and allows them to be involved. I would say this really centers on most of our challenges, and to talk about different revenue streams or opportunities to improve conditions for the roads, because on PBOT's page, they mentioned that the budget cuts will impact paving, maintenance, road improvements, is meeting with different groups that do things like the Better Center project over in Foster Powell. And there are people that are highly motivated, willing to put their time in and effort, that I'm meeting at these neighborhood associations, different community groups that are more than willing to step up, to take the time to make sure that their communities look better. And even I think in some of the conversations I've had with, or some of the exchanges for communication with like the Better Center, is that they said, some of these lower hanging fruits, we'd be more than willing to try to fundraise and cover the costs, and just have PBOT come out and approve. And I think decentralization in incentivizing people to participate in their business associations and their neighborhood associations by diverting not a lot of funding, because it doesn't sound like it's going to take a lot, but enough funding and enough decision-making power over what's happening in their local neighborhood to get them actively involved.
So use the ability to invest locally directly
Yes.
to get people more involved,
So
and also take a little bit of the liability off the city's coffers in a way.
absolutely.
So as a way to activate. Okay, I want to just so what do you? I want to ask, what did you think about the resolution? Just to stay on this for one more second here, what did you think about the resolution on the 82nd Avenue Transit project? So basically, a lot of people wanted these fully dedicated bus lanes, semi-dedicated. Again, you can drive in them to get into driveways and turn. A lot of people wanted them basically the whole length of the project from Clackamas all the way up to Northeast Lombard. Other folks had a lot of concerns. Some business owners went public and said, we're not into this at all. We don't want any of these special BAT lanes, business access and transit lanes. The basically compromise solution that is, I think, going to carry the day and move forward that they just came out with this week or last week is that they'll just pull it back at Powell, and they're going to try to fund. They're going to fund because politically, if they don't fund it, it would be very messy. Like an economic
they're
development
obligated.
Like
the contract with ODOT to be bought. So
yeah, they want to do an economic impact, study on the businesses, right? Something that the businesses wanted. They were using that in part as a way to say, you better not do the project. We want to know before we know exactly, but there was a compromise. So they said, we're going to go ahead and do most of the bus lanes, except at Powell, and we'll also do this economic impact study for the businesses. So do you think that is a good resolution to that project?
I think it was an inevitable resolution to that project. Once again, I think just reflecting on the pros and cons or the outcomes that we have seen in similar projects being implemented, down division, or whatever closest example we have that we can apply to this case. I think if they're just conscious and intentional about where those bus stops are, then the conversation will change quickly after we see them implemented.
Okay. You're saying more clarity around project details would help assuage concerns from business owners who might be thinking that the street's changing in a way they don't want.
I think it's, I think our representative for that area, Taylor, I don't know what their last name is. They've spoken about this project, the board member for TriMet, and just really talking about kind of these changes about what, infrastructure is intended for 100 years ago versus what we're utilizing, the needs that it needs to fulfill today.
Yeah, you're talking about Tyler Frisbee, the board member, TriMet. Yeah.
So I think those conversations are hard to hear. I think, unfortunately, we do have this disassociation, and I think coming from a perspective that is deeply grounded in personal stakes, decisions that are made by different folks that have security when they make that decision as a consultant or working from a nonprofit agency or from the government, the impact is different if the outcomes don't go well for them than the public or for a business. So if I take a gamble and I put everything I have on the line, my reputation, all the relationships I built up over, the 4 years of Asian American Town to do the legendary Makers Market, and I don't know if something's going to happen or there's an accident or something goes wrong or a cost goes from 10,000 to 20,000. I just don't have the money to cover it anymore. That's for me, the feeling I think all these business owners have, because, it's very tough. So any level of uncertainty around what might happen to their business when they thought that they were in a secure place, especially setting up a brick and mortar, should be respected. And in that conversation with them, I think there's a way to meet them where they're at.
I heard another thing in recent interview you did where you were talking about lack of parking spaces on Sandy Boulevard. Sandy Boulevard, yes. I think pretty much all of it is a lot of it is in your district, except for a little slice in your 42nd or something.
Thank you for helping lead into more revenue generating opportunities.
Well, I wanted to mention that because you talked about the growth on Sandy, obviously folks know, around like Northeast 21st, 28th, lots of new housing.
Yeah, you keep going
Yeah.
east on Sandy, there's that renovation of, I think, mostly housing for older folks or retirees. Then you go more west, you'll
Mm-hmm.
see
So,
quite more of the Altina or Athena. But there's numerous kind of apartments that have gone up in the last 6 or 7 years since I moved here.
mhm.
Yeah.
And as folks know, we have building policies in Portland that are don't require developers to make, two parking spaces for every unit or
Right.
even one or whatever, right? So we have a relatively little bit of car parking relative to the units. But I'm just curious, what do you think is the remedy for that, right? Like if where are people going to put their cars? Do you just hope that they take transit that you've already kind of talked about not necessarily always being reliable for folks, or they're going to get on bikes? Or what is your remedy for that situation where you have busy corridor like Sandy, lots of
Mhm.
people own cars? We want to encourage more dense, people living closer together. What do we do with all those cars?
So I think that there's a combination of different things we can do, and this has played out long enough that I think we have experienced seeing that a lot of people move from car-centric cities with their cars. These units no longer have to match the number of units that are available in their apartments with parking spaces. And I was meeting with one of the real estate managers for one of the apartments, and they were just saying they have a shortfall, I think, of like 20% parking spaces for the number of units available. And those cars go somewhere. They just don't disappear, and they go somewhere as close as possible so they spill into residential. So if you go bike up and down the streets right around 28th Avenue in particular, as you get closer to Burnside, a lot of those streets should no longer be two lane because you've got cars jammed in there up and down. And personally, I can't imagine that all those cars are from the people that live right on those streets directly. Uh, I think the goal for the ultimate future that we'd like to see, which is less cars or less reliance on cars, if we can implement more things like we see at Gateway, where they have a smart or park and ride. But I'd like to see a combination of a city smart park. So a city smart park and ride. So the things about living abroad for so long is, people pay for that transportation. It funds itself in a way. And we also have different rail lines that are privatized in Seoul. And when you come here, there's no barrier to even getting on transportation in the first place. So there's not a lot of opportunities as a physical barrier. So go to New York City, you have to go down the subway. They've tried to do fare evasion to the best of their abilities. Korea's the same way. You've got subway stations. There's security there. There's CCTV there. There's no perception that it's unsafe to ride public transportation, and there is a reliable ridership that is very willing to pay to ride, and they have got integrated services where you have just one form of payment that works for the subway, works for
Mhm.
buses, and it works for taxis.
So you're saying create parking facilities that people will pay for.
We'll pay for it. But here's the incentive part. So if you do a city smart park where you come in, you do the whole exchange, that should allow you to park your car and then ride public transportation with that same thing. And here's where we get to tie in small businesses. So we don't necessarily need to make all small businesses or local businesses participate in this, but the ones that do should benefit. So businesses that want to opt in can validate. So then you get back on public transportation, get back to your car at the city smart park, and you don't have to pay for parking. But you've solicited a local business who's
Mhm.
helping pay into that revenue base for transportation. And what we're trying to do is get people out of their cars.
So I'm curious where these smart parks go and who pays to build them.
So I think this is part about kind of looking at a multimodal kind of transportation future and looking at PSEF as that initial base, not necessarily needing to be a continual source of revenue for all of them. It's to help line up all these different revenue generating opportunities that can help alleviate and then eliminate the cars that we see on the roads. Because what we have right now is basically you go back to people, they're like, well, it's car registration, it's the gas tax, it's other kind of fees that are related to people who drive, but we're trying to eliminate people driving. So if we don't come up with alternative modes that slowly phase these things out while still creating a sustainable kind of revenue base, uh, we don't really have much of a future in transportation at all.
If we don't incentivize people to not drive more,
if we don't replace this old model of revenue generation,
I see, of course, right,
for transportation, for repairing our roads with something new
mm-hmm.
that can start downsizing the amount of cars that are needed on roads. Because there are two things that I've heard so far. The old school way that we thought about traffic is to try to get people through our city as fast as possible. What we're seeing right now through projects like Better Center, other ones,
yeah,
is to make sure that we can slow the pace of traffic.
Right.
So through road diets, through diversions, and this will allow us to kind of free up more road space. Is if we create more parking structures like that, city smart parks, or even parking lots where people can get the cars off the streets into a parking lot. That helps kind of change how they're impacting our everyday life. Because the reason they're on the street is because they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
But if we provide another place for them to park their car, how much more likely do you think if it's maybe even a block, it's not so inconvenient that you wouldn't, but if it's a block away, you might just forget about your car in the first place.
Yeah. My concern is space is valuable. Using it to park cars is not a great use. And again, I don't know who's going to pay for that. PSEV's not going to pay for parking lots.
Well, right now, what we have,
and so that's a big concern. I just wonder, like, how you balance that with saying, what I would say is like, the answer would be, to some degree, I do think we need some interim solutions. It's interesting that you have this idea, because I had this idea back when everybody was moving here and we first were starting to grapple with where are we going to park all these cars in these new apartment buildings. I was saying, and I think I surprised some of my folks here by saying, yeah, you know what? We need a place to put these cars. I was saying the developers need to bury them underground, because I'm not willing to, and I don't think the city would be politically, it would be really difficult to do anything that allows someone any convenience with their car, especially something that's going to cost public money, right?
Well,
Because
you still need to pay for your car to be parked in this.
Yeah, I just wonder how if that's going to be able to cover the price of it. And I think any idea that doesn't increase the pain around the use of a car is going to be something that's difficult for a lot of people to get behind, right?
So I think you and I come from two different experiences in the sense that I lived 7 years in a place that made transportation so convenient, public transportation, that the thought of driving a car didn't need to be painful. And I think if we can create these localized clusters for city smart parks and strategic zones that we already know have high traffic for people who would like to patronize businesses, corridors like that 28th and Sandy, we already know is a really great space because you could get out of your car. You could walk to Broadway. You could walk to Burnside. You could also, you don't even need to build an entire smart park. You just need some place that is off the main roads, but that also allows us an opportunity to start doing the things that DPAVE would like to do, which is to create car-free streets. And the thing is, it's very difficult to implement those projects if we don't have an alternative space for those cars to go. But we can also create an alternative space for those cars to go with already kind of mostly unused lots that will generate revenue that can eventually pay for these things on their own. So a combination of different funding sources, I think, will be smart. And I guess that's part of the whole thing about the city smart park and ride idea. To me, is the only way that we can give somebody a ticket that they don't have to pay for right away that could be validated by small businesses that will incentivize them to pay into this project, because the early adopters will be the winners.
Okay. Yeah.
And the zones that I've identified that we really need them are in the Central East Side, especially since we're about to have a 3,500 venue kind of go up in the next year or two.
The Live Nation site down there.
And then we also have the OMSI district that is they already received a first round of funding, so they can break ground on certain projects or get those things started with like road redirection. So we're seeing this massive influx that we can anticipate. And I think if we place one of those there, we place one at that. Unfortunately, I don't know how well that Walgreens is doing, but that Walgreens on Cesar Chavez in Belmont, I think is a prime location because you can walk there to Stark, Belmont, Hawthorne. And by the time you walk to Hawthorne, you might as well walk to Division. It's right next to the library that just got renovated. It's a hot zone. I think that's the thing about people wanting these road diets is we need to give people a reason in a place to park their car, get out of them, and use these multi-means of transportation. Because the moment you get out of your car, get them on a bus, they know they don't have to pay for it. And if they patronize a business, spend $20, they don't even have to pay for parking in the first place.
Okay, it's an interesting idea. I'm trying to warm up to it because I do like different ideas and ways of tackling things. I'm super uncomfortable with the idea of facilitating the parking of cars in the city, anywhere really, but especially in the areas you're talking about. But well, if it would be an interim thing, if we can use existing lots, if we could, like you said, wrap it in services that would incentivize people to use their cars less ultimately, and if we could also generate some revenue from it. I mean, I'm trying to. It's okay. Interesting.
It's like a mostly baked plan, and I think the more I hear, the more it kind of makes sense to me. Because then, if you combine this with like Frog Ferry that wants to start in Vancouver, you set one up there. They park the car, and then they're on the ferry, get downtown. They ride around downtown, come back on the ferry, and then they have their thing validated if they visited a local business. Or this could be an incentive to get places like OHSU to help kind of fund some of these projects initially, is to incentivize them to really create this new form of looking at transportation, which is more holistic.
It's interesting because I think this is a key tension that's going to play out regularly in the coming years is, do we approach, how people get around by like sort of forcibly making people experience inconvenience with their cars in order to get them out of their cars, or another way by making, obviously I would say yes, make biking and buses awesome, so competitive that it's the choice people naturally want to make. Of course, that's going to take time. So what do we do in the meantime? Are we willing to create additional parking spots as part of that bargain? That's a tricky question, but what are we going to end up on here? This is going to be a key thing going forward.
I don't think we're necessarily creating new parking spots. We can start with just
using them in different ways.
Yeah, so the Walgreens parking lot, for example, we can just, if we took over that parking lot or had a rental agreement with them.
I hear you.
So we can start small.
Okay.
And kind of ease in. The idea is mostly you need people to get out of their car as soon as possible and start walking or riding the bus.
And you know what I always say, Tom, is that when there are ideas like this and we're talking about things that initially, like I hear as a streets advocate person who wants to see a lot less driving, to me the messenger is really important. Yeah. Right. And that's why I was caught up in that conversation earlier about businesses and people saying that their voices weren't heard. It's really important to me who's saying that and what I think their motives are and what's really driving those concerns, right? And I've been around long enough. I know a lot of times those concerns are not driven by it's driven by things of saying, we don't like buses and bikes, we want drug cars. So I get that. But so it's interesting, this conversation is going to come down a lot to, do people trust you as Tom Sollitt, the person who's pushing this idea? Do they trust that you're going to do some of those other things you said, like support pedestrianizing some street and do other things that are more progressive when it comes to reforming streets, right?
Absolutely.
Because if they sense anything in you that's car oriented and you're the guy talking about this innovative idea about new parking ride spaces, this could be a non-starter thing, right? But if they're willing to extend you some trust and say, hey, this guy actually has some good intentions here. He just has a different way of dealing with this really real problem in the moment, which is too many cars on the streets, nowhere to park them. Let's hear him out. So I think that's what's going to happen.
I think they can go hand in hand. I think the moment we set up something like that at the Walgreens parking lot, I'm just going to keep going back there, then the conversation around having no cars parked along Belmont from Cesar Chavez up to 60th is more of an option, because now we've taken the number of cars that park there and given them a place to go park.
Yeah, I hear you say maybe it spurs the ability to have other conversations we can't have right now because there's simply no other place for people to put their cars.
It's part of the economic growth of the West Side. So people have remarked that they're doing really well because it's a car-centric area, but people have places to park, but they sprawl. We don't have the opportunity to sprawl, so we have to build up. And this is from somebody who just lived 7 years in a place that is high density, is mixed use kind of business and housing, and has a really kind of strong ability to keep that infrastructure going.
This whole conversation reminds me of an idea that some friends of mine in the advocacy space talk about from time to time. Is like, we have TriMet's got their transit service plan. Like we're talking about before, PBOT has their bike master plan. We actually might need like a car plan, because cars are this obviously massive pound gorilla in the conversation always, but we don't actually have a car plan. We don't have a set of goals and recommendations, really. We have plans that say we want fewer of them, but we don't have one that intentionally says they're here. What should we do with them?
Right.
How do we actually decrease their numbers? And then I think this issue, like we're talking about this parking thing, could be part of that car plan. Anyway,
it's in reducing the amount of space they take up and concentrating.
And being more intentional about it, and having actually a city strategy that says, here's our automobile usage plan for 2035. And, so that would be interesting. Maybe you could start that plan.
Well, to me, it goes hand in hand because there is I believe, a greenway next to that library, the Walgreens parking lot, that I would like to claim somehow, maybe through eminent domain.
You mean
hopefully there's no Walgreen advocates listening to this podcast. But it's there. The library is there. We have that greenway there on kind of off the main street that we try to divert traffic into Belmont or onto Cesar Chavez. But to me, some of these things can really actually align because we're centering things around where we think the most people are going to concentrate. And that goes along with TriMet's plan. It goes along with our greenway plan as well for bikes. They can go hand in hand. So
yeah.
I don't see these as competitive. There's a way that I think we can integrate all three.
Could you see a future Sandy Boulevard with a protected bike lane on it?
I believe this is the conversation that got Commissioner Chloe U. Daly.
No, that was Hawthorne.
It was Hawthorne, yeah.
Maybe Hawthorne. It's been a while since Commissioner Daly was around. But no, there is actually talk of a bike lane on Sandy because they're going to repave it very soon. Yeah. And there's been a lot of work done already for people to, consider. I'm just curious if you could see a street like Sandy, major commercial corridor, and could you imagine it with a protected bike lane?
Yes.
Because Hawthorne was another major conversation.
That's just a short one.
That one's a little easy. That one's a little more difficult, I think.
Well, Sandy, actually, we really need to constrict the number of lanes. So
it's a lot wider than Hawthorne, which is why it's easier.
So it has the opportunity. I think we've seen some very successful ways that people have integrated bike lanes that also even include parking still. The Southwest 4th Avenue project has been very successful. I've seen the ways that could use improvement on like Broadway, where they put the bike lane towards the street and then the parking towards the business, which allows kind of people who do delivery to stop in the bike lane. So once again, these things we have examples of that we don't need to repeat. I think the conversation looks a little bit different too, because we have more people that may need to utilize Sandy as a bike throwaway that makes more sense, especially with all those apartments going up.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to ask you about Vision Zero and safety. It's such a huge thing, and definitely in District 3. Right now, one of the counselors for District 3 has made Tiffany Lane has made Vision Zero one of her main issues. It's her main platform issue. Yeah. I'm curious if you think that approach in general is a good way to frame the problem of road deaths by proclaiming a Vision Zero and having a Vision Zero plan. Do you think that's a good way to approach the problem? And do you have any input on why you think people are still getting hurt and killed in traffic?
Unfortunately, I think we have so many different organizations that are doing great work, like the Street Trust, DPAVE, Better Center, but we isolate different conversation points, and unfortunately that is the way that communication works broadly, I think, through the media is just we only see one side of a conversation. And sometimes it's easier to kind of center uh, maybe a campaign or a promise around one thing that you're trying to solve. But it's more complicated than that. And I think to go back to kind of what led me to all these things is, one of the major projects that I looked at when I was early on here in 2018 and 2019, I did a week-long program around wellness through the lens of public health. So I've engaged with people from like the director of pedestrian traffic over at PBOT during that time, the dean of OHSU's public health department, and did a whole panel with public health urban planners. So understanding what that means on kind of like a more 50,000 foot view is important.
Right.
It is important. It is tough to just look at that one thing by itself.
You mean deaths
Yes.
by itself, you're saying?
But we need to take a look at what that reveals about the way our processes work. Because I think I looked at your article about what happened on Division with the person who hit that pothole. And the article within it described that PBOT came out and filled that pothole within a day. Does it take somebody to die to see some action or graffiti around a pothole or calling, I think, 311? So I think the deaths really show us in crystal clear focus or gaps in our infrastructure that need addressing.
Can you think of anything in particular that PBOT could do differently to reduce the amount of deaths and serious injuries?
Once again, decentralization of kind of these projects. So the Better Center folks sent me an email that included kind of a metro plan for how to do quick builds around kind of improving infrastructure that go as low as, I think, a couple $1,000s. And that's why I said it doesn't take a lot of money that gets redistributed. We just need to have better conversations with all our different transportation agencies, whether it's within our city control or whether it's intergovernmental through Metro or through TriMet, to make sure everyone's on board to maybe allow even more localized participation, because no one's going to know what needs fixing more than the person who's worried about crossing this one street every day as they try to go back and forth to their home and to work or to their favorite bar.
So you're saying try to activate the super local quick build, maybe like tactical urbanism stuff.
Tactical urbanism.
Get people let people plug in and okay, interesting.
And I think that's the fastest way that we can get these problems solved. PBOT keeps acknowledging the budget shortfalls. They've struck maintenance for listed maintenance as some of the things in paving some of the major issues. There are very light things that can be done through strategic crossway paintings that, once again, very low budget. And I think if we can use next year as an opportunity to redefine our budget to allow more money to flow to the neighborhood association so they can do targeted kind of improvements, we'll see fewer accidents or deaths, or their proposals for what needs kind of more expensive barriers or diverters that they'll need more funding for.
Cool. Okay.
So a different way to prioritize what needs to get done. That's all.
Okay. Okay. We're wrapping up here, but I've got to ask you about Waymo, autonomous vehicles. There's a renewed sense that they're going to just come into Portland, and obviously there was a bill down in Salem. It's thankfully dead. But the city of Portland is updating their administrative rule in light of Waymo wanting to come here. Have you ever ridden in one before? What do you think about the future possibility of these Waymo robotaxis on the streets of Portland?
Personally, I don't need to ride in a Waymo to imagine the detrimental impact that they will have in our communities by existing. I think we're already under surveillance. We're already under increased surveillance through things like Flock or even people utilizing Ring cameras. And Waymo has to utilize 360 cameras everywhere they go. So they're collecting data all the time and they're going everywhere. So people got freaked out when the Ring camera suggested that search and rescue for dogs and activating all those cameras. What's going to happen when Maymo decides to, you know, update their terms of services without even needing to alert kind of local governments that they're going to do that? We're also taking a look at all the rideshare kind of union drivers that we have here in all those jobs that will be impacted when we talk about, I think, the proposals for things to increase kind of retail or third party delivery. Those unions were definitely present to make sure that their voices were heard. Like, is there anything you could do for us? Maybe a respite center. Uh, but those jobs are eliminated. And for somebody who's, also concerned about it, is one of the most attainable entry points for work
Mm.
is rideshare as a driver.
A lot of immigrants.
A lot of immigrants.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen to those opportunities for them?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it just has an adverse effect for folks who may be limited for employment in the first place because of their immigration status, concerns around surveillance. I just don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
And until we get better federal, all the way to the federal level, I think laws and restrictions and rules and protections, those don't have a place here in a just society.
Okay, I hear you. Okay, give you a chance to shout out a small business. Bike riders love small businesses. Like, you've done Bike Summer, you've probably seen it, but like I would wager that every year there's hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million, I don't know, dollars in local economic impact from these organized bike rides. Hundreds of organized bike rides. They almost all include some sort of store stop, or people love doing rides to a food cart pod or something. So tell folks what's a good Asian American owned business in your district, or more than one, that people should check out on their next bike ride.
Forgive me, there's just actually an incredible amount.
I know it's hard. I'm putting you on the spot too,
of Asian businesses on in District 3, but maybe I'll just shout out one, Friendship Kitchen. If you go over to that corner, there's also Hano as well.
Okay.
So all in the same kind of corner area. And that also still positions you really close to 28th and Burnside, where we got Moon Pocha, we have Potty, we've got, I think Long Bon is no more. But there are some pretty incredible options no matter where you go for Asian food in District 3.
Awesome.
Once again, shout out to us for also, I think, having the almost over half of the Portland Monthly 2025 top restaurants. I think a good number in the Eater one as well. I would encourage both of those publications to maybe look at District 1 a little closer, because I don't think that they venture into that part of town.
Yeah, and I should have said this is at the top, folks, but District 3 is basically southeast, central east side over to 82nd, 92nd.
You go up Sandy Boulevard.
Sandy Boulevard, essentially, and then down to like Clatsop. So like the county, the city line or the county line at Clatsop.
Arletta.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly diverse in all the different places you can go. Oh yeah, Foster Food Carts is back.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So.
Okay, very cool. I'm seeing like a definitely like a D3.
Sorry, I'm like obsessed with my neighborhood, like, because I basically walk everywhere. I already kind of frequent most of the places in the neighborhood. So.
Cool. Well, cool. Tom, thanks so much for your time. Is there anything else that you want folks to hear before I let you go? And I guess you're going to that transportation funding thing later tonight?
Absolutely. I'm still in a listening phase. So a lot of the things that I've aggregated here are from conversations and the things that I brought up. I think being a representative means having direct communication with constituents to make sure that they understand that they've got an advocate in office. I'm not here to tell people what's going on so much as being a good partner, but to be a good partner, I need people to also be open to having conversations with me about some of the things that are going well and some of the things that could go better.
Sounds good. Well, I'll encourage folks to visit your website, and I'm sure they will see you around town. I know you're out and about a lot right now. You've been going to City Hall and getting a sense for how things work down there. You're really being like a student of the game, as we say.
Tried to go the other night, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, with the arrests and everything.
Just definitely, when I arrived, I was like, maybe I'll watch this on Zoom.
Yeah. It's like any Any regrets about declaring candidacy when you go to City Hall and you see 4 people arrested outside and the inability to even have a meeting? But we'll leave that for maybe another conversation. Yeah. So, Tom, thanks so much for coming over.
Thank you as well.
And good luck with your campaign.
Thank you.